Thank you. And thank you, Minnesota Lyme, for having me, Gail. Thanks for calling and bugging Rebecca, who then, as she said, pimped me out. Thanks, Rebecca. I'll update her tomorrow. So Paul comes and sits in front of me. He goes, it just doesn't make sense. He's frustrated. I can pick up on that immediately. You guys probably have experienced this. He has no energy. He says, I can't focus. My mind is a mess. It's foggy. I'm wiped out all the time. I can't remember things. And I can't keep track of things. So Paul works at the C-suite. 38-year-old man, married, has a couple of kids, and he's an executive in a big corporation. Now, you don't get to be an executive in a big corporation working at the C-suite if you don't have energy and you can't focus. But this is something new to him. This has only been happening for the last couple of years. So what about me? Thank you, Bobby, for the great introduction. So how did I wind up here? Sort of a circuitous route, but I'm sitting in front of my patients. I'm a primary care doc. My heart is within primary care. Your story, Paul, was awesome. You went to your primary care doc and got better. Yay! And I wasn't helping people. They were stuck, and I was stuck on how to help them. So I landed in a lecture with somebody talking about health coaching. A light went on. Health coaching, that's what I need to know. I need to know how to talk to somebody. So I started that. That gave me exposure to Jeffrey Bland in a lecture, and if you don't know who he is, he's the father of functional medicine. And I looked at the slide that he was talking about, and that was true healing. That was my biochemistry geek inside me got really excited to see all the pathways that were there. But I saw true healing, and I realized at that moment in conventional medicine, we take symptoms and throw pharmaceuticals at it. We don't understand or look for the reason behind those symptoms. And that's the difference between functional medicine, and that's what got me my attention, and that's where I took the next 3.5 years of learning and education to get my certification for functional medicine. To my husband's sort of annoyance, and yeah, this is Terry, I'm continuously curious. I love to learn. I love to know about things. I will always be curious. And that's my greatest strength and my greatest weakness. So Paul was worried about not getting better. He felt like he never could get better. It was all a puzzle with him. So the solution so far is he actually landed in front of a psychiatrist who diagnosed him as having depression and attention deficit disorder. Now, that didn't make sense to Paul. He's like, I don't feel depressed. I just don't feel right. And I've never had attention deficit disorder. Isn't this like a childhood kind of thing? Yeah, okay. So he was put on medications, Zoloft, Adderall. Those aren't really great medications to begin with. He had lots of side effects. He didn't like it. Now, he did try to do stuff on his own. His diet, he tried to change it, sleep, meditate, exercises, all of that had minimal impact on how he was feeling. So he landed up in front of me going, I don't get it. At this point, I am not in the conventional world. I have left that. I am an integrative functional medicine physician. I look for things in a different way, and I look at things in a different way. Problem was that the medications, like I said, were not helping. He was completely frustrated. He was hopeless about the whole situation. Is it ever going to get any better? He's concerned that he can't do his job. I mean, his whole job is part of his identity, who we are. He's in the C-suite, so that was problematic to him. Would he always be like that? That secret little nagging thought? With taking medications that he felt like he didn't need, that he have no choice? What else was going on with Paul? So I love this quote by Einstein. One of my other favorite quotes has to do with insanity and doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I was told originally that Einstein made that quote, but that actually is not true. He did this one. You cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So if somebody's sitting in front of me in conventional medicines, oh, okay, you have this symptom, that symptom, that symptom, so I can put it in this bucket and call it disease, and that bucket and call it disease, and I can throw this medication at it and that medication at it, and that didn't work, well, let's try this medication. Oh, you have side effects? Oh, I better give you that medication. But now you have this problem and that problem. The same problems using the same thinking is not going to create a different solution. So how about we think differently? So to illustrate this a little bit more, I'm going to talk about a clock. A clock is a mechanical creation. It has parts. We can identify each of the parts. The parts are put together, and when they're all put together correctly, they work. When things break, we can take that part out, fix it, put it back in, and expect it to work just like it did before. No problem. That's pretty understandable. Let's contrast this to clouds, though. Clouds are constantly changing. They're unpredictable. There are no broken pieces. They just continuously evolve. They come, they go, they move, they change. It is a system that's behaving exactly the way a system is supposed to behave. We are not clocks. We are more like clouds. So when I think about it, and I talk to people in front of me about being well, the reality is being well and being ill is an ever-changing situation. What you were yesterday may not be today, wasn't 5 years ago, and hopefully 2 years from now, you're much better in a place. But it's a dynamic, it moves. Oftentimes our actions that we take fail to improve things, and we're puzzled. How come? Why? What we think is true turns out to be wrong. It didn't work that way. What worked before no longer works. In essence, it's messy. We're like clouds. So that messiness means that everything is connected. Things affect other things. Is no just one particular key component. There are many components together. All those components together, they are interwoven and they're interconnected. It's honoring that interwovenness and that interconnection that allows us to clarify that problem so we can find the solution. So how I think is, okay, I'm overwhelmed, I'm confused, I don't know what's going on, so let me find clarity. So clarity means where are the biggest issues going on? And in functional medicine, we don't look at the heart system, the lung system, the vessel system, the gut system in isolation. We switch it around and we look at the systems in a biological sense, in a biochemistry sense. So I'm looking at the systems of energy. Is your body getting enough energy? I'm looking at your systems as immune, defense and repair. Is your immune system all funky? I'm looking at your system as saying, is your gut working well and is your liver working well? So those systems affect everything. My example for that is somebody will come and sit in front of me and they'll have asthma, they'll have allergies, and they have eczema. And normally they would be seeing a pulmonologist, an allergist, and a dermatologist, all giving them all sorts of medications to treat that. Functional medicine says, okay, wait a minute, what do these have in common? What's that thorough thread? Inflammation. All of those are manifestations of inflammation. Why is this person inflamed? Well, could be food intolerances, it could be genetics, it could be topical, it could be environmental, it could be poor nutrition, it could be a lot of things. The key part is it's inflammation. So I've had a number of patients sitting in front of me with this exact same scenario. We address the inflammation, turns out to be food intolerances. Lo and behold, all three of those get better, and they tend to just feel better, their energy is better, and overall their aches and pains and stiffness, they didn't really acknowledge that that was there because it had been so prevalent for so long, now resolved. Inflammation. The lens is the system, not the clock. So we find clarity, we determine that root cause. Then we look at where we think those root causes are, and where can we do the biggest leverage. Because everything is interconnected and interwoven, when we tug on one part of it, we're tugging on all of it. So like the inflammation example, because I addressed the inflammation, 3 different things got better. So if I help with the immune system, I'm undoubtedly helping with the gut system. If I'm helping with the gut system, I'm undoubtedly helping with the immune system. So as we use one thing and intervene or work on one thing, we're working on the entire thing because everything's interconnected. You have to pick and choose what's the biggest imbalance, what's the biggest problem for the person sitting in front of me. They're tired, they're fatigued, they can't think, what is that biggest thing? And I have my list, they have their list, and okay, well, we have to negotiate which one do we want to do first and for how long. So you got to think strategically. But because we are an adaptive system, because we are clouds, we always have to adjust and we always have to adapt. We always have to look and see what happened. It isn't a guarantee because I did this that you will feel better in 10 days and 2 minutes and oh, by the way, great, go plan that move and go live the rest of your life in 10 days from now. It doesn't work that way. I'm sure all of you experience things like that. The expectations, you do this and you're gonna feel better, and yeah, sorta, kinda, but then this happened and ooh, okay, well, let's think about this again. So adapt and adjust. It isn't a frustrating thing to adapt and adjust because, at least not in my frame, because that means your body's reacting to something. It is doing something, and so, gosh, how do we take that energy of change and move it in the right direction? So don't get too discouraged with this. When you're in the midst of chronic things, it can be very discouraging. But we have to do one thing at a time, get a little bit better, and I believe things can get better. So back to Paul. Turns out, no surprise to you guys, that he did not have depression. He did not have ADD. What he had was a gut problem. I know you guys thought immediately he had Lyme's. We tested, it was negative. But he did have a gut problem. He had something called Sibo, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Now for him, it actually created such a metabolic burden that his neurotransmitters were off, that his adrenals were fatigued, and therefore he had no energy and his gut wasn't absorbing things and the nutrients the way it should. And so his clinical manifestations of his gut issue was actually brain fog and mood issues. Yeah, he had some gas, he had some other things, but he sort of dismissed it. That was just like, oh, you know, I ate something wrong. And it turns out he didn't eat anything wrong. What was heartening for Paul is that once we started treatment, in about 2 weeks, his mental fogginess cleared. His energy came back in about 3 weeks. And after his protocol he finished, he was off his medicines. He was starting to wean off that, and he was very happy with that. He was back at his job, living the job that he really loved. So the interconnections of energy and focus. Now I'm going to dial down a little bit here. I'm going to go big picture, and then we're going to go a little small. So that's you, that's us. We all in the middle of everything, but like I said, everything affects everything. We are interconnected. So there's lots of stuff around us that can affect our energy and our focus. So the first ring, or the first metabolic thing that I look at is the 4 things: gut, hormones, neurotransmitters, okay, and genetics. Those things kind of cross my mind. Other things, though, are in the back of my mind, and I eventually get to them as well. Sleep is a big thing. If you are not sleeping well for whatever reason, you will be fatigued, you will not remember. I've had enough personal experience with being chronically sleep deprived to testify to all of those things. Your nutrition, if you're eating foods that are trigger inflammation, that inflammation in your gut and in your body, I guarantee, is inflammation in your brain. There is no barrier with inflammation. You got an inflamed gut, you have an inflamed brain. What are you eating? Huge impact on your whole body. Stress. We all have stress. How do we work with our stress? What do we deal with our stress? And that's what makes it internal with your adrenals and all the stress response. Movement. We all know we should move our body and exercise, but sometimes movement is a stress that will tip you over into negative. Sometimes movement is a stress that tips you over into positive. So what does that look like? Again, your gut inner circle one. Things also in the back of my head that I'm always curious about is, does a person live with a sense of purpose? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Because if they're not going to be a real happy person. And I can't metabolically change anything about that. So they got to know, are they doing what they're supposed to doing? Because if they are, Wow, life, what is it? You go do your passion and you never have to go to work a day? What's that saying? So purpose is a big thing. I keep that in the back of mind, and I have asked people very much in front of me, are you doing what you were meant to do? Community, what is your community? You guys have a community here. You are not in isolation. The support is amazingly healing for people in community. You have to have that. The environment, the way I look at environment is not only where we live, but where do you sleep, where do you work, where do you play, is another question in my head. What does the environment literally look like for you? The environment of toxins, molds, and EMF. People are sensitive to that. Sometimes that is the trigger for things to go downhill. We figure it out, and then we boost people's immune systems or their ability to recover. And so, again, that crosses our minds. One that doesn't always get talked about, but I know is quite true, is trauma. It doesn't matter almost whenever the trauma occurs. It could be childhood or adult, but if it is unaddressed or unresolved, it will affect your health. I've seen it too often. If it's not there, I ask about it. And if it's not addressed, I tell them it needs to be addressed. If you are reliving that trauma through nightmares, through PTSD, through whatever it is, physiologically you are reliving that trauma again and again and again. Physiologically, that will leave its mark. So trauma, you gotta know about it. Again, we got all that together. So the big picture when I think of things is all of these cross my mind when I think about energy and focus. Kind of like, I'm asking questions, they're telling me stories, I'm watching them, I'm looking at them. What is going on? Where is this energy and focus? Where's the barriers? So I'm going to dial in on the metabolic lens, that first ring, and again, gut, hormones, neurotransmitters, and genetics. That's the boxes that I get checked off as I talk to people. So when I talk about the gut, you guys know about leaky gut and those kinds of things. It's not a new concept to you. So we have, our gut is attached to our brain by a big thick nerve called the vagus nerve. Our gut is often considered to be the second brain because of the connections. If you're ever nervous, reading something and you think you're going to get a little lost or startled, and you feel that kind of tightness in your gut, that's nervousness, but it has a direct gut connection. So those are not separate. You know, you've heard about the microbiome. Our microbiome is this set of bacteria and viruses and all sorts of interesting things that live in a symbiotic relationship with us. They help make stuff that we need, and we let them live in our gut. But it has to be particular types of bugs, and it has to be in the right balance, and it has to be in the right area. When that gets all wonky from stress, wrong food, trauma, just about you name it, antibiotic exposure, then it sets up bad processes that can trigger, again, the whole systemic kind of thing. Inflammation usually is triggered in the gut through food, through bacteria, through infections, that type of thing. What's interesting is most people don't know that 70% of their serotonin is made in their gut. Now, serotonin is a neurotransmitter, but it is needed for the function of your gut, and it's made mostly there. So if you have bad processes going on, you have inflammation, your microbiome's off, you have an infection, your serotonin might be a little off, and that might explain some of the mental fogginess and fatigue. Hormones. When I talk about hormones, I tell people there's a hierarchy of them. You just don't go, just sit in front of somebody and go, it's my thyroid, doc. I've heard that a number of times. I can't lose weight and I'm tired, it's my thyroid. I'm like, okay, let's pause. And I explain to them there's a hierarchy of hormone that you have to do. There's a big master hormone for the body, and that's insulin. So what it has to do with your carbohydrate and your sugar metabolism. If your sugar metabolism and insulin is off, then that's the first one that has to be addressed and managed. The next one up is actually your adrenals. So your carbohydrate's great, but your adrenals get tagged because you're chronically inflamed, you're chronically infected. What major stress, unresolved trauma doesn't really matter. If your adrenals are perpetually taxed, they will start to affect. Then it is your thyroids. And then I look at your thyroids and I'm like, okay, so if I'm gonna look at your thyroids, and yes, your thyroid values are off in an in-depth assessment, I'm always gonna ask about your adrenals, and I'm always gonna ask about your insulin, because if I don't do those two, I'm not gonna make any movement to your thyroid. The last is the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Now, if we know when it's low and it's off, we really do feel that imbalance of those sex hormones. And I'm not saying we don't give those types, we do, but we're also concurrently addressing the other ones. Because if I don't, I'm just throwing medications at a symptom. And I philosophically don't agree with that. That's why I do functional medicine. So the neurotransmitters. So 2 big buckets of neurotransmitters to kind of get your mind wrapped around it. No pun intended, right? So you have excitatory neurotransmitters and you have inhibitory neurotransmitters. So the excitatory ones are the dopamines. That's your pleasure reward system. It's the motivation. It's your tolerance to stress. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, that's your attention, that's your focus. Your inhibitory ones are the ones that keep you calm, keep you relaxed, serotonin, joy, pleasure, it's your mood. We need all of those because sometimes we actually do need to get intense and focused. Other times we just need to chill. The excitatory is sort of like the gas in a car, and the inhibitories are like a brake in that car. They need to be balanced. They have to have both. Genetics comes up when things aren't working the way they should be. When I'm curious, we've done XYZ, we've done 1, 2, 3, and there's still really not much movement and much forwardness. Now, poor metabolic functioning under the right circumstances can interfere with your body's ability to generate energy and focus. So if you have a SNP, or a single nucleotide polymorphism, in the chemical processes that are connected with energy, neurotransmitters and hormones, then you don't have, by definition, the right balance of them, the right amount of them. You increase the need, you decrease the load, then the demand gets changed, and they can really start to have a big effect on how people feel. So examples of this, you probably may have heard the MTHFR. It's called another thing, but I'll pause and not say that one. There's a COMT gene, and that has to do with detoxification. The MAOA, that has to do with neurotransmitters, and MAOB is neurotransmitters as they degrade. If those are off, then your balances between your excitatory and inhibitory start to get unbalanced, and you will feel that. So what do? You're like, okay, great, all this is really cool, but what about me? I would be the same thing. So we're going to ask questions about all 4 of those areas. So how is your gut? So if you're having any heartburn, any bloating, you eat a food, and the next day or 3 days later, you could still have the effect from that food. So that's the intolerances can be immediate. The intolerances can be up to 72 hours later. So connecting the food to how you feel sometimes takes a little pause and a little bit of detective work, but your diet can have a huge amount on how you feel. So what you can do, you can experiment, you can do an elimination diet, you can do Whole30. Whole30 is great as far as taking away the most common allergy intolerances and lets you, gives recipes or support, all those kinds of things. There are specific nutrition plans. The Mito diet is specifically to help support the mitochondria. The SCD is the specific carbohydrate diet, and the AIP is the autoimmune protocol type diet. So those for Hashimoto's, thyroiditis type of things. You can test. We do a fair amount of testing for our gut because it really is important. Conventional medicine doesn't have the type of test that tells us about the microbiome and leaky gut and some of those infections. So there's a specific functional ones that I like to do. And it's always in the back of my head, does this person have Sibo? Because that is a huge metabolic drain on the body. If they have that, that must be addressed first because we'll never get to anything else unless we take that big, huge drain off first. That's kind of the peak of the mountain. So that's always in my brain. Is this a Sibo patient or not? Hormones, what do you do about your hormones? Well, gosh, look at your diet. What is your carbohydrates? How are you feeling after a meal with carbohydrates? Do you get sleepy? you may not be metabolizing those carbohydrates really well. Simple carbs, you craving sugars, you gotta have that cookie, those kinds of things. There is a carbohydrate issue going on there, probably for lots of reasons, but just so you know. Adrenals, it's a fatigue, but it's a fatigue that you wake up tired, or you wake up, you do okay, and by noon or 1 o'clock, you're just flat on the floor. And it's just sort of the sluggish kind of thing. Again, conventional medicine doesn't do a great testing on this. I do a functional test where you spit into little tubes 4 times a day, and then we actually get a good measurement of your adrenals over the 24 hours. So we can see what the pattern is like. Thyroids, I do an in-depth thyroid blood test. Again, conventional medicine tends to limit this to TSH, maybe T4, but I go beyond that with inactive hormones of the T4 and T3. I look at antibodies and I look at the TSH. And then the sex hormones, that kind of is individual. Do we test, do we not? It sort of depends. Sometimes we just go ahead and support the woman who's 48 and has hot flashes and can't sleep. Oh, here, let's give you some progesterone so you can sleep. And okay, we'll work on everything else at the same time. So for neurotransmitters, looking at your mood, looking at your drive, looking at your attention, do you get calm? Are you just agitated? Are you just like, oh, I can't think? Is the mood in the brain fog? So to increase that focused dopamine, you can do, or the GABAamine, the calming, you can do 5-HTP as an experiment, see what happens. You can also get specific dopamine. There's a whole bunch of them out there to see if that makes a difference as well. Caution though, if you are imbalanced, you may be driving a bigger imbalance. So always take what I'm suggesting here as a sort of a grain of salt experiment, but be really quick at pulling back and go, no, that's not working. And you can always come see us. So for genetics, again, if somebody has a family history of mood issues, chemical dependency, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, alcoholism, my red flag for genetic issues start to get really raised. I'm like, you've inherited something. All of those conditions run in the same inheritance gene. So, gosh, there's got to be something there. I'm really suspicious. If there's more than one metabolic system involved, so if they're not detoxifying well and their hormones are all crazy and I think their adrenals suck, and then yes, their gut's not working well, and I'm like, oh, you have like 6, 7 different things. Your genes are likely making all of that worse and not function very well. You can get some hints of the genetics in the labs without a direct gene analysis. The particular one that pops in my mind is something called homocysteine. It has to do with B12 metabolism. So there are some hints with some genetic or generic blood test. So you can go to direct-to-consumer genetic testing. 23andMe and Ancestry.com are the two I usually recommend. So I do a particular service at our clinic with a genetic review in which I get this data, I put it through a program, and then we look at an in-depth analysis of this. But this 23andMe and Ancestry.com is not your full genetic analysis. This is only a partial part of it. So I don't interpret the findings of this as actual fact unless I'm telling somebody to clinically sequence their entire genome, which is pricey and likely not going to happen. I'm also not a genetic counselor. So what I take that information is I say, these are really good clues. This is some really great stuff that says, let's go in this direction, because chances are we're going to get some pretty good stuff here. And this makes sense of why this is not working for you. Now let's pull back on this because this really isn't working. So there is some areas in genetics that works really well. If you have antidepressants or on some type of psychiatry meds, there are programs where you can do specific genes for those particular medications. So I'm not quite talking about that, but there are some clinical usefulness for genetic analysis. So here's one that's an individual for everything. There are some things that we can control. There are some things that we cannot. And in the middle is what we can influence. What that is yours. It's not mine. I can help change how you think about things. I can maybe change how you think about influencing and what you actually do have control and what you don't have control. But that influence area, what you can, you already know what you can control, what you can't. I would actually challenge you a little bit to say probably a lot of that is you can have control. And in that middle part of influence, that's where the work is. That's where the heart is. That's where how we think about who we are and how we feel really gets challenged. But being well, in my head, in my view, and how I approach it, involves more than just chemistry. It involves the body, but it involves the mind, and it involves the spirit as well. It also involves others. We cannot and do not live in isolation. If we did, we would literally die. We're not hardwired to live in isolation. So for me, being well is all about life, enjoyment, people, having fun, and just like, okay, am I living the good life? Am I at the end of the day going, yeah, you know, that was a good day. Yeah, it wasn't great, it wasn't 100%, it was all this, but you know what? It was a pretty damn good day. We all just want to be happy. So for me, there is power of being well. And then I want people to live well and to be well. I want them to epitomize what it is for them to be well. There you go.
So thank you, and I think if we can, we'll do some questions. I just had a couple things maybe to get started, but so it sounds like there's ways to address the physical and the emotional blocks, which are both pretty important.
Yes, you can't, in my head, you can't separate the mind and the body like conventional medicine does. They're like, oh, you need to go see a psychiatrist. Well, no, because the mood is affected by the body and the body's affects to the mood. So I am addressing all of that at the same time. I'm like going, you probably feel like crap, don't you? Yeah, and your brain's foggy. It is, and you can't remember things, and you're frustrated, and then you go like this, and then they look at me and they go, yeah, how did you know? And I'm like, because that's part of all of it. So yeah, you can't separate the two.
To complete that full healing, you kind of need both aspects.
Yeah, it's all part of it, yes.
And then I know there's a lot of people that, are severely chronically ill. And that's why traditional medicine has failed them. So that's a large part why functional medicine, I think, has people's attention. Where do you, you've laid out that there are tests, there are ways to get you more information. Where do you recommend starting for people that are just either lost or completely chronically ill and just, the mind, body, and spirit having 100 or 90% day, 80% day sounds great, but not even close to that.
Right.
What is the first step?
Yeah, they're reversed. They're 20% good and 80, 90% bad.
Right.
For that, that's a tough one because it depends on where they're at. Now they can go see a integrative provider and say, hey, this is what I'm going on. When I see those people in front of me, my first goal isn't to cure them. My first goal is to build up their resiliency. So I know they are depleted in their brain chemistry, their nutrition, and those. I can't ask anybody to go and do stress management when they don't have any energy to do it. I can't ask them to go do that movement. So it is about looking at your food. Taking the first thing is look at what you eat and what can you switch out to a more healthy thing. Pay attention to how your body responds to food. I eat this. Okay, for the next 72 hours, I'm going to watch my achiness, my stiffness, my mental fogginess, my sleep, my irritability, because all of those can manifest with the wrong food. So it really is the first step. Who am I and how is my body responding to things? You will always be the ultimate expert on you. I can give you advice, I can give you information, but you need to let me know if you're working with me, does it work or does it not work? You're the expert. I'm going to defer to you. So getting that body and connection, knowing you, is really kind of like the learning curve. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question enough.
Just try to get some food for thought for, I know everyone's coming at it from different perspectives.
Yes.
Questions?
I wowed you all, right? Wow! A+.
Just in general, in your practice, how much the process works, I mean, as far as visits and other things?
So in the natural medicine of Stillwater, we tend to see Lyme patients that have already been treated, and now they have, their immune system is still being triggered for whatever reason. There's no active Lyme, there's no active co-infections or anything like that, but their immune system is still acting like there is. And so we do something called immunotherapy, in which we teach the body to calm down that immune response. So we tend to see more of the chronic immune responses to that, or the complications. People can get Sibo and have had Lyme's because they've had all those antibiotics. Their neurotransmitters can get all funky. So we don't necessarily are treating the Lyme, active Lyme right there. We just don't have the facilities to do that, but we very much treat the ramifications of having that Lyme.
So you guys do, I mean, they do have Lyme literate doctors on staff, and you do have the ability to write, prescriptions if you need to, right? I mean, that is, so I mean, it is all on the table in terms of the holistic approach, right? And a lot of the cleanup is really valuable with the functional medicine. And
Right.
I mean, I'll just tell you from personal experience, if I could start over, it probably would have been with a team of doctors, the captain of the ship, probably functional medicine. Because of all the damage that you're doing from the antibiotics, which can be helpful, right? I just think it's really important that you have that whole wellness approach. And those general practitioners are so good at the textbooks, but I think this disease is much more complex than that. So where I see a lot of help is having a functional medicine doctor on your team, to help with that healing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my encouragement, is the cleanup, the wellness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really where you're going to start to get better.
Right, yeah.
Because it does do damage.
Right,
The antibiotics
yeah.
is good. There's good and bad to both. And so
Right.
having a captain of the ship, I think, is important. And, a lot of you have
Yeah.
expressed that wellness piece is kind of what's missing. You've tried a lot of the antibiotics. You've tried the IV therapy. So we're all still trying to learn together on what works, and it's not the
Right.
same for everybody.
It's not the same for everything. And if you're not better, then it may not be the Lyme. Now, that may be really hard to hear, but then I'm going to look at, well, gosh, what is your nutrition? Do you have a leaky gut? Do you have Sibo? What is your neurotransmitters? What else is going on in your body that's draining your resiliency? Can I give you back some of that resiliency with some Myers IV, some IV vitamin C in an antioxidant level? Can we do other things to boost your own natural body's ability to heal itself and give that the energy it needs, and then step back and let it do what it needs to do? So that cleanup, that's a great way, Bobby, of saying that, is that cleanup, the ramifications of that isn't just that you no longer have Lyme's. You have the sequela of having that Lyme's and the treatment fallout, if you will. That drains the body, and that drain in itself is not a really good place to be in. And so that's where we tend to work and start to build things up. So I don't know if that answered your question or not. Sort of, kind of, maybe?
Yes, it's helpful.
Okay.
I was going to add, I go to that clinic, and it's nice, you feel kind of a safety net, because they know what they're doing. Your testing is amazing. The experts, 3 doctors, experts in it, and even to go in when you're down and out, when you get triggered and real bad, you can go in. Like I've gone in for a Myers IV, because I was treated in Florida for 5 months. It was all IV. And because I couldn't walk or anything, and I got better, but 2 years later, I started going downhill. And finding you guys was amazing to have in the state of Minnesota, because otherwise you're flying all over the country to get rid of this. But like if you need a Myers, it boosts your immune system. It helps get over certain humps that you're sick in bed and can't get out. I ended up with Sibo, mast cell activation. It's not just the Lyme, it's all the Bartonella is hard to get rid of, all the 42 co-infections. I've had it for 10 years, and the more you learn and go to different doctors, and you find out, the medical doctors, I have mine right there here, when I taught in this district, I had my doctor downtown last summer say, because I had to go in for a urinary tract infection.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I went in just to get the test, and he said, Jan, I am just so sorry, we don't know what to do with you people. And that hit me like, whoa, know, I'm at a good place, you know, and I feel those doctors are so, my cousin's a doctor, I have doctors in the family and stuff, but they're so book text. This is a disease that, or many diseases are like that, where it's so over-encompassing, they can't begin to learn about this. I mean, it started off how many years ago? Well, I can go into a lot, but you just learn as you go, but it's just a safe haven to know you guys are there. You can go in and help. They've done the research. They know what they're doing. You know, it's just really, I encourage anyone, if you feel lost, just go in for a visit. You know, and if you have the mold issue, I found out I have a gene where I can't expel black mold, and I was loaded with it. And so the Lyme and the mold just destroyed my cartilage and all that stuff, but there are ways to build it up. And I go in every once in a while for a glute IV or a glute push, and it gets it out of your system. Just certain things that you learn, you know, that I wish I would have known right from day one, 10 years ago, you know.
For all this stuff that you guys carry, we're talking about insurance pay, right?
No, that's why you do what you can when you can, and we
Yeah.
don't do a lot of things we used to. And in the middle of all this, I've had a lot of trauma, you know,
Yeah.
and I know that's a huge part. We
Yeah.
lost a lot. And it's so important now. Your health is the most important thing. You know, so you do what you can, I guess. And that and the food aspect. And I don't know if you know that medical medium book, like You're So Into Food, and that is a great place that isn't a lot of money too, and you can read and learn what to do. But I really appreciate you, Terry, coming here
Aw,
and talking.
yeah.
You did a great job.
Thank
The
you.
functional medicine piece, I don't know that people that are in chronic stage will ever get healthy without it. I mean, I was a naysayer for it for a long time.
Yeah, me too.
It's hard to believe that, you know, that something as simple as what you guys implement, you know, it is a lot of work, but lean on them to put a plan together, because it can be overwhelming. And, you know, money is an item that I know is an issue for people, but the functional part of it, I think you have to absolutely have on your team. And for the mold stuff, just as an FYI, so September, we have Dr. Lori Radosky speaking, and one of the things she'll hit on is mold toxicity. And then in November, we have Kathy Moore coming in with Newbridge Clinic for a Q&A, which that seems to be where people are most interested in learning from each other. So she's going to help facilitate that with some expertise, and that would be a good time as well for some of the mold and some of those other issues. So, yeah, any other questions that people have?
Yeah, in functional medicine, I'm very familiar with it. Like some of the people in the room was treated by somebody in Western Minnesota who discovered my line, functional medicine guy who's unfortunately now out of business. But big believer and a lot of experience in it. But if you could talk, I wasn't going to ask specific, but if you could talk, the insurance question came up, and generally, you know, functional medicine insurance doesn't support. If you could talk, you know, one of the probably major concerns is testing. You know, some tests can cost a lot of money if you go in, but in general, cost to be treated, cost to see somebody, and again, that's more specifics of what I was more interested in.
So we don't take insurance. We do use insurance for laboratories at any time we can.
And believe me, I'm not pushing insurance.
And philosophically, I think there's a couple of things, and we were talking earlier today about insurance. And if insurance was part of this world, because of the reimbursement rate, we'd actually have to see 20 to 30 people a day. We can't see somebody for 45 minutes, an hour and a half. Somebody sits in front of us, we're literally oftentimes sitting there an hour, helping them, doing them things, getting their IVs, asking those kinds of things. So that would be off the table. My aside to that is that healing doesn't occur outside a relationship between you and me. The space in between you and me, this area, we can talk woo-woo, metaphysical, whatever you want. Healing doesn't occur outside that. Medicine and healing is not a transactional process. It is a relational process. insurance, the way they reimburse, creates a business model where you have to earn money to keep the lights on, to pay the people. So therefore, time is what gets cut. So that's that part of insurance. Insurance also, in a very circuitous route, will basically say, dictate how and what I could treat with people. And so without insurance, I have all the options here. I can do this, I can do that, I can do this. They also won't necessarily, because we don't take insurance, they don't come in and go, show us your records. Because we don't agree with everything. You have to prove, and then you have to write your notes in a certain way. So therefore we get, yeah, that's my box on insurance. And I'll be really blunt, because I live in this integrative world, my medical license is not on the most solid world as compared to conventional, functional, or family practice employed physician. There's no threat to my license in that whatsoever. Outside in this little world, I really love what I do, and I want to do it as long as I can. So I'm very cognizant of, well, gosh, what's outside the line, what's not, what's my risk tolerance, what's not, and my risk tolerance is probably different than other people's risk tolerance. And I can be a little conservative while I'm learning and being comfortable and all of this. So some of it is dictated by what I'll do and what I won't, because it is a precarious world. I personally don't want to have the medical board come knock on my door and go, come stand in front of me and defend your choices.
You can call the clinic too, I know, and talk to on the pricing and stuff. I've done that before, and I would tell you most of the providers are aware of people in our situation, and being that it is cash, all out of pocket, I mean, definitely vet it out, but I would say that it's pretty reasonable compared to most. They're good people over there, and I don't think money is what drives it, but obviously they have to make a living too. So.
Yeah, from my end, that's a positive. I mean, having, like everybody else here having experience, it's a positive you don't take insurance because of all the restrictions.
Yeah, they limit the treatment, right?
So I'm curious. Yeah. So I'm curious, what else was driving that question?
I'm looking. I've gone like every chronic. You kind of go from here to here to here.
Yep.
And I've been helped by a lot of people. Mostly, it's been holistic herbalist the last 3 years. I'm looking for somebody to, hopefully, everybody wants to be pushed over that edge to now I'm healthy. And, thinking of calling you and finding out how does it work and
Yeah.
can you help?
You can always call. We have free 10-minute phone calls. So if you wanted to schedule a free 10 minutes, oftentimes it goes over 10 minutes. But then they say, okay, here's my issue, what's this? And then we just say, how can we help you, or we can't. But just call and schedule a free 10-minute phone call.
And maybe just one last one for everybody. Can you talk a little about Sibo? I'm not familiar with that.
You don't know about Sibo? So Sibo is actually quite a large part of our clinical practice, because Dr. Bradley has his own diagnostics, and that's his little baby. That's one of his little niches that he really loves to do. So Sibo is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So you have bacteria sitting in your small intestine that normally should be in your large intestine. And so the types of bacteria that can be in the large intestine, number one, it shouldn't be there. Number two, the types can be problematic in the amount and the load that's there. So if you have a little bit, you're probably not going to have a big issue. If you have a lot, probably you're going to have a lot of issues, much like Paul did in the example earlier. And so the flavor of the Sibo can be one of three things. It could be hydrogen, it could be methane, or it could be sulfur. Each one of those have its own kind of particular way of healing, but that is like the big rock that if I want to move somebody to get healthy, I got to move that one first. Almost everything is connected to that or interfered with that or drawn down by it. So if that's not addressed first, I can throw lots of things at all the other stuff, but I'm really at that point throwing things at symptoms. I'm not taking the root cause. Sibo is a root cause. Now, it may not be the only root cause. There may be things underneath Sibo, but we don't know that until we get rid of that. So that's a condition triggered by a lot of different things: stress, gallbladders, antibiotics, surgery. The list is endless almost.
Is it possible to get rid of SIBO?
Oh, absolutely. It can be easy to get rid of, and it can be not so easy. Again, there's no real way to predict who gets where, who takes a while, and who doesn't. So in full transparency, I actually had this, and I was diagnosed last December, and I'm just now eating my first avocado 6 months later. So it was a trial, and I didn't have an intense one at all. I did not have an intense one. So I have empathy for those who really had the intense ones. But you can. It just takes really mindfulness of this. SIBO's there. Okay, let's treat that. How's the recovery? We need to adapt to other things? Do we need to re-look at things, re-clarify that root cause? Because that SIBO, if it's been sitting there for X amount of years, you may have some mast cell activation underneath that. Once we take care of that SIBO, then the mast cells.
Topic that's coming up in September as well. So the toxicity mast cell. Make sure you check the website.
Yeah.
The speakers up there. That's obviously a big one.
Yeah. So anyways.
Did you treat yourself or did you hire Dr. Boyd?
I hired Dr. Bush. I learned the hard way, do not treat myself as a patient. No, really bad.
A couple more. Sandy, and then I think Gary, you had one. Sandy.
Okay, so I've been seeing a functional medicine doc for a little while, and I know that it is a constantly evolving field.
It is.
Every time we have an appointment, it seems like she's been to another conference where she learned a lot more, and networking and blah, blah, blah. So some of the things that you mentioned, we were talking about Myers. It sounds like it's like a, okay, I had this great, my wordage, you guys all understand. So what, I was wondering if you have, like, what is the word? Like,
My question
kind of
related to
and-
this is to go over those ideas.
if you have, yes, if you have some sort of like, okay, here is not necessarily a protocol, but when we have somebody that is suffering in this portion, they can come into the office and we can, this is, a treatment that we could do that might, raise them from the dead temporarily. As we're going through this treatment, there's gotta be a
As
good
a
word for
support,
it.
as a support.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. So, and I was wondering if in each of those 4 things, do you have something that you've used successfully in each of those 4 areas that you mapped out?
The gut, hormones, neurotransmitter, genetic
Yes.
4?
Yep, or like where does Myers fit and what is it?
Myers is an IV. It's a cocktail of B vitamins, trace minerals, some vitamin C, magnesium. So it's a cocktail that is this nice, pretty little orange, and we give it IV. So it goes directly into the body, bypasses the gut, doesn't have to go to the liver first before it gets changed to go to the rest of the body. So it feeds the metabolic processes directly.
And so which area would you stick that in if you were therapy?
Almost in any of them. It really depends on how depleted somebody, I think, is sitting in front of me. So I have people who've gone through Sibo who can't eat because their diarrhea is regret and they're nauseous because of the herbs that we're giving or the antibiotics, and they're just like, oh, well, let's give them some, number one, fluids because they're dehydrated. And that in itself, if you're dehydrated, you're going to feel bad. And then give them some Myers so their metabolic processes can get back to normal. Because they're already depleted. They came in depleted with the Sibo. Now we're treating them and asking their body to take a lot of energy to heal. They don't necessarily have those in reserve. So now we just kind of boost them up. We give that a little bit of resiliency. And so for the next day, maybe 2, they have good energy. They can eat again. Their appetite is back and they're not nauseous. Now, some people that lasts a while. Other people, we're seeing them twice a week for Myers for 2 or 3 weeks while they're really bad through all the treatment. Other people come in and they haven't been eating well, their gut's just awful, and they want the antioxidant aspect of vitamin C therapy. So vitamin C therapy is anti-cancer levels and antioxidants levels. So for immune boosting, we're gonna use the antioxidant level of that. So then that's a treatment protocol for that. So it really kind of depends. There isn't a set, gut, I see this, therefore they get that. It's more of how do they feel and how do they look, and gosh, what are they doing, and can we help them feel better?
Right. So yeah, that's what I was looking for. If you had like any of these, my son also, so we have SIRS, as well as the post-Lyme, and there must be a mast cell deal with it. So he's got this 72-hour, and we can't make it stop. Once it flares, we're like, we gotta make it stop, and we're having a hard time getting it to stop. And so that's the type of thing that I was looking for. Is there anything that we can, when we know that it's a flare specifically, is there anything that you would suggest us talking to our functional medicine doctor about in terms of kind of that emergency, help me, I'm dying type treatment?
If you do a Myers, it would be an experiment.
Okay.
It really is. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it lasts all week, sometimes it lasts just a day. Sometimes it's just an experiment. Well, let's see how you do. Sometimes those genetics interfere with our Myers and they actually get worse and they can't sleep when they're up all night because we've given them something that their genetics didn't like. All right, okay, now we just backtrack a little bit and then figure that out. By the time people come and they're like this, it's not a simple Paul story. It's usually, okay, let's do one thing at a time. We're not gonna make you better. We're not gonna make you worse. Our first goal is not to make you worse. Our second goal is to make you better. We're gonna do 1 inch at a time. Sometimes it's a turtle step. Sometimes it's a baby step, but that's our goal. We're just gonna do kind of kid gloves because we really don't want people to crash and burn. That's awful. You don't wanna cause that. So it's hard to answer to say, yes, that would be really great for that flare because they don't know enough specifics about what that flare means for him.
Absolutely. I was just wondering what is in your arsenal that I could talk to my functional medicine doctor about, and she can say, familiar, not for your situation.
Yeah,
Or, "Not let me do some."
we're doing, for the mast cell activation, we have some medications that I prescribe for that, some other things. So yeah, make a free phone call. Talk to Dr. Bradley. Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer or not, but my son, he's the one, the patient, and he's the one suffering from Lyme's. And I, the caregiver, you know, and it's so hard for me to know, I mean, how long, what is really a Lyme disease, or what is depression, or what is just fake, you know, I just at a point, like, I'm getting very frustrated with him. And I've been trying to help him. He was treated in Mexico for 6 months with antibiotics, and then in Minnesota for a month and a half with IV. But I just don't see any improvements at all. So everything you mentioned is what Bruno seems to have. But every time, every week, I tell him you need to see a therapist, you need to go to see a psychiatrist, you need antidepressants. So should I stop that? I just don't know how can I help him.
Well, the first question that kept on popping in my brain was, how are you taking care of you?
He's not on me.
Yes.
I think I'm surviving because, you know, it's just, I've been through a lot. These lead me to separation because, you know, Dad wasn't understanding to, like, he's, you know, lazy, and I'm trying to, he doesn't understand. That's why thanks to Carmen, I wanted to come here because I was just very lost about it.
If you don't mind, so we do have caregiver support meetings. I think you'd really find merit in that, and there's a lot of people that are in your same situation. And I'm gonna pick on Dorian for a second, but you can tug on her ear a little bit too, because she's had a child in the same situation. You know, having a teenager where it's already difficult to communicate, I would imagine you have a complex disease and a complex human.
Well, he's 24. He's not a teenager anymore.
Well,
he doesn't, you know, he doesn't have a job. He's just, you know, homebody. He doesn't want to do anything.
Let's get you to caregiver support, and I think after, you know, maybe connect with Dorian, and we can, you know, next month, I believe we have a caregiver, and I think you'd really benefit from that. And, I mean, we're all in this together, and what you're saying, you're not alone, and I would agree. What are you doing to take care of yourself? So let's see if we can start with that and go from there.
I'm wondering if you mentioned SNPs. Are there any particular SNPs that for MTHFR that we should that will trigger Lyme that we should really get straight before, if we've had the report?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
That's a interesting question. I don't know.
What is SNPs?
Yeah.
When you get a report, the genetic report, each one of the genes is kind of called a SNP. There's thousands of them. But they tend to group into, like, if you have a problem in this area, then you're going to end up with these kind of issues, you know? So I was wondering if there was a pattern about Lyme.
Yeah. And I'll make a comment, last comment, and thank you. For the genetic analysis, there are free things out there and not free things out there. And I guess my advice would be to look for a genetic analysis that puts everything together and makes the connections on a metabolic process. So the one that pops in my brain is Stratagene. Ben Lynch has a great book out there called Dirty Genes that really explains about SNPs and how it impacts and the presentation of all of that. So if that interests you at all, that's a great book. He has in the back a bunch of resources. The Prometheus, and that might be it. The problem with a lot of them, they take one gene and they say, that you have a SNP in this gene, this means that. You have a SNP in this gene and you need that. And the body doesn't work in isolation like that. All of these genes, all of these biochemistries are connected. The neurotransmitters to melatonin connects to your MTHFR, which connects us to your DCOMP, which connects us to all these other ones. And if you're not aware of all those connections, having that isolation doesn't really tell you a whole lot and will lead you down a rabbit hole that probably will hurt more than help. So there's other programs out there that can do that. So that's my only criticisms for a chunk of those out there. So, and the ones that will promote their own supplements, I step back and just, now Ben has a little bit of that, but I've been and learned from him way before he started his own supplement company. So my cynicism's falling through here. Sorry about that, and that ends tonight. Thank you. Thanks, Bobby.